we've got to have reform. And we've got to have reform in the way the railways work. And it cannot be right that some ticket offices, I think, Grant, are selling, roughly one ticket per hour. We need to get those staff out from behind plate glass onto the platforms, interacting with passengers, with customers in the way that they want to do.
But the RMT says the reforms mean job cuts and workers need a pay rise that reflects the increased cost of living. It has rejected a pay offer worth 3%.
I don't think Sunday will be the end of it from what I can see. If we can negotiate a deal this week, it can be, but otherwise we'll have to look at what campaigns we're going to put on going forward, and we think that other unions are going to join to this dispute on the railway and more broadly in society.
Train companies said they were very disappointed and called on the RMT to carry on talking. The union said it was still open to discussions that could settle the dispute. For now, rail passengers across Britain face a week of disruption. Vincent McAviney, BBC News.
And I'm joined now by Andrew Haines, who is the Chief Executive of Network Rail, which of course looks after the rail infrastructure. Mr. Haines, thank you for joining us today. Hello to you.
Hi. Can
I begin by asking you why a pay offer was made to the RMT just yesterday, so late in the day? Do you think that was unhelpful, the timing of that?
Look, I think the offer you're referring to was an offer made in the negotiations between the train operating companies and the RMT. That wasn't part of the Network Rail negotiations. But look, before we say anything else, I really must apologise to people who have been massively disrupted today. I'm so sorry that these strikes have gone ahead. We've done our best to avoid them, and we're doing our best to run a service. But I recognise just how devastating this impact will be for some people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We heard from YouGov a little earlier on their latest polling on this, and more than a third of people say they support these strikes. We've been hearing from viewers this morning, and that's not a scientific survey, of course, but while there are some who oppose them, some are on the fence and sympathetic with the idea, although unhappy about the disruption. Lots of people saying they fully support the strikes. And don't people just want, a safe railway system and the ability to get from A to B, but they want people to have a decent wage as well?
Look, that's absolutely right, and so do we. I mean, there is a very real cost of living challenge. Nobody in this country could deny that, and we want to be in a position to give our colleagues in Network Rail a decent pay award. And the best way to do that is for the RMT to agree to get rid of some of the 1960s and 1970s working practices that make the railway deeply inefficient at the moment. If we can do that, and I believe there's a willingness amongst our colleagues to do it, then we can give them a decent pay rise, and we can make the railways more attractive to the users of the network.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about working practices and reform without, I think, an awful lot of detail on what exactly that reform is. Now, Boris Johnson, in the clip we played from his...
If you've got time, I could give you quite a few examples.
OK, and I will get you to give me some examples. I mean, Boris Johnson, in the clip we played a little earlier from the Cabinet meeting, talked about some ticket offices selling just one ticket per hour. And I don't know if you know whether that's a reality, but what sort of reforms are you talking about?
Well, I think I've seen the data around those ticket offices, and whilst Network Rail doesn't manage the ticket offices, it's absolutely the case that I think less than 12% of all tickets sold in Britain now are sold through a ticket office. So, the idea that we stick with the ticket office procedures and practices and opening hours from an era when all tickets are bought at a station, I think everybody would say, why would we stick to those previous practices? There are lots of examples where we can make efficiencies in Network Rail. I mean, we have colleagues from distant disciplines who refuse to get in the same van as each other. So we send two vans to site. We've got fixed teams that we have to send regardless of the size of the task. We've got that, with one team is then not allowed to help another team unload the van. We've got refusal to use technology, which can save lives and make the railway more reliable. And interestingly, we've been very clear, we've written again last night to the RMT, we believe that all the efficiencies we can make could be done through voluntary means, that voluntary redundancy would be the way to do this. So no compulsory redundancies, no imposing these things. By agreement, we could get voluntary redundancies if only we can talk about some of those practices that I think most people would think are pretty outrageous in the 2020s.
Okay, so you've made some of the points that you would like to, about the reforms that you would like to see happening, Mr. Haines. From the union perspective, they're talking about, you know, a lack of engagement, and that these reforms are really a banner for job cuts. Does that involve job cuts, those reforms?
Well, it will involve efficiencies, but the point is, I've written to them and said, look, we can do that through voluntary measures. We've got an ageing workforce. We've got quite a number of people, are over 60. We know my inbox is full of people saying, I would like to take voluntary severance.
But would you put a number? Would you put a number on the number of jobs you're talking about cutting?
We've talked about under 2,000. That we think that is, so it's, you know, in an organisation that employs over 40,000 people, and all of them through voluntary means.
Let me come back to the first question which I asked you today, and I know that that's not directly the bit of the negotiations that you're involved in, but do you think an offer, a pay offer, being made literally just yesterday on the eve of these strikes was very late in the day, really, to try to stop them? Wouldn't it have been more sensible for that pay offer to have been made earlier in the talks process as a basis perhaps for ongoing negotiation?
Look, I don't agree with that, Anita, because look, I've been involved in negotiations over many years, and the truth of the matter is a strike is not a reality, until a few hours before it's activated. And a pay offer that was made, yesterday morning, there was plenty of time for there to be negotiations and for the strike to be called off, or indeed for the RMT to do what most of the trade unions would do, which would be to put that offer to its membership, allow the membership to decide on whether or not they still wanted to take strike action once they had visibility of the offer. Now, in our case,
a little bit late in the day to allow the if the offer was made yesterday morning, a little bit late in the day to ask the membership if they still wanted to pursue strike action, don't you think?
Well, look, the nature of the legislation in this country means that the RMT have got 6 months now when they can call strikes. So these strikes today didn't have to go ahead. The RMT would have lost nothing by saying, OK, we're going to pause, see what people think about that offer, maybe negotiate around it. They could have always have called subsequent strike dates. Their mandate lasts until November. So there was no reason to rush into this action. It's needless disruption. It's going to cost their members and my colleagues in Network Rail serious, financial harm. It'll cost the railway financial harm, and of course devastate lots of people. We've heard of students wanting to finish their final exams, people visiting hospitals, people to this country who are really facing a very poor service as a consequence. None of that's in anyone's interest.
I just want to ask you about something else that Boris Johnson said at Cabinet this morning. He was saying to the public affected by this strike to stay the course. So, I'm talking about the language that was used there. I mean, are you concerned that this is the start of perhaps more action? Yes, we've got 2 more 24-hour walkouts later this week, but do you think more could follow?
Look, I hope that we can avoid those further strikes. I think the RMT have said they are prepared to take more action, but at this stage, we've got time to talk to them, to try to thrash out the basis of a deal that is actually acceptable to our colleagues in Network Rail and actually allows us to run these services. So,
would you like the government to get involved more? I talked to the boss of a pub chain earlier who said, look, the government needs to stop union bashing and get more involved and help sort this out. Could the government play a bigger role here, in your opinion?
Well, look, I very much doubt that pub chain boss has his shareholders around the negotiating table, and I don't think that's a model that works anywhere in the economy. These are quite detailed conversations, negotiations around fundamental changes to working practices. The best people to do that are the union that representing colleagues and myself and my colleagues as leaders of the business. I think the government is the shareholder. It sets a context, but it should not be involved in those detailed negotiations. It would create a wonderful media story, but it wouldn't make resolving this any better at all. It would make it harder.
Do you think this week of strikes might improve the pay offer? Just finally.
I think that's going to be hard because we as Network Rail will be losing over £100 million, maybe as much as £150 million. That's less money I've got to put into a pay offer. I don't see how strike action results in a better pay offer than the one we were ready to make just yesterday evening still, for which we could not get the productivity unlocked to fund. That's the key here, unlocking the productivity to fund a decent pay award that I believe rail workers deserve, but we have to find a way to pay for it that isn't just going to say a further drag on the taxpayer. If you were to ask, the people you asked about sympathy for the strike, the question you need to be asking is, do they want to pay more tax or do they want to see more efficiency in the railway?
Andrew Haines, CEO of Network Rail, thank you very much.
Thank you.